At the beginning of the story shows an old man named John Knox who is having dinner at a restaurant with his friend. It is revealed that John and his friend are senior hitmen who are known to be very brutal and never fail when carrying out missions. After finishing dinner, John and his friend separated to go home to their each homes. In the morning, John went to a doctor specialist to have his head examined because almost every day John often experienced dizziness. Then, John was immediately examined using modern medical equipment. After the results came out, the doctor explained that John had dementia, which would make the sufferer suddenly dizzy and also forget easily or short memory lost. Then the doctor apologized because he couldn't cure John's disease because the disease was very severe. Even the doctor also asked John to pray a lot because John's life wouldn't be long anymore. Hearing this, John could only surrender and was sincere if tomorrow or the day after tomorrow he would die. The next day, showing John who just woke up with a fairly young woman named Annie. It turns out that this woman is John's girlfriend because John has been separated from his wife, Ruby, for 2 years. John also has a grown-up son. John even has granddaughter, but they live together with his ex-wife. Here, John tells his girlfriend about his illness, and John says that his life will not be long. John hopes that his girlfriend will continue to accompany John, because none then she beside him now. The evening shows John together with his friend Thomas Muncy, who will carry out a job, which is to kill someone. Before entering the target's house, the friend said that they should be more careful and not leave any evidence. But here John already doesn't care even if he has to be caught or in prison, because soon his life will end. Then they split up. His partner moved through the back, while John would enter from the front. Unfortunately, when John was already inside the target's house, his illness had to relapse, which made John's head severe pain. However, John survived as much as possible. Then quickly he immediately finished off his target, who was bathing at that time. After that, John turned off the water tap because the sound was very disturbing to John's head. At the same time, John heard the sound of people going into the bathroom, until John immediately shot him. It turned out that the person was Muncy, John's own friend, who had entered through the back way. All of this was due to the effects of John's illness, which was relapsing, so John forgot that he was with Muncy. After realizing his actions, John could only reflect because he didn't expect his friend to die at John's own hands. Then John tried to trick the crime scene so that it looked as if the target and his friend had killed each other. Meanwhile, he manipulated it as if he was never there. The next day shows a police detective named Emily Ikari and one of her colleagues who are processing the crime scene for the death of John's target, as well as his friend last night. Here, the detective is convinced that in this case, there must be a third party who has escaped. She suspected this because if they died for shooting each other, then who was the person had turned off the water tap? In the end, the detective and his partner decided to investigate the case in more detail. The scene moved to John, who was visiting someone. It turns out that this person who always gives John a job and also pays John when he can finish off his target. This person is John's mentor, named Philip Jones. Here, John tells him that last night he had successfully eliminated his target. But John also accidentally had to kill Muncy due to John's sudden relapse of illness. Maybe it's time for John to retire from the hitman because his condition is not as healthy as before. Then John also told the mentor about his age, which wouldn't be long. John advised that if he was gone, then John asked the mentor to give all of his inheritance to the 3 people John loved the most. Hearing this, the mentor promised to fulfill all John's wishes, and the mentor asked John to get plenty of rest. Later that night, when John was at home, he suddenly heard a knock on the door. When he opened it, it was John's son with a wounded hand and was very panicked. John immediately brought his son inside, then invited him to talk at the dinner table. He was told that his son was named Miles, and John asked Miles to tell him what had happened. Then Miles explained that he had just finished off a Masher man. This is because that man has impregnated his daughter, or John's granddaughter, who is only 17 years old. Meanwhile, that man himself is 34 years old, a mature man. Initially, Miles was only going to teach that man a lesson, but that man instead told him how delicious and pleasure it was to have sex with his daughter. So Miles angry and immediately finished him. While the purpose of Miles' arrival here is to ask John for help on how he can be freed from the law for his actions, John replied that Miles just needed to calm down and Miles should now clean himself first. Then John asked Miles to put his clothes in a plastic bag that he had provided. After finishing his shower, John asked Miles to return to his mother's house and never tell anyone about the murder. John promised to take care of the case, and Miles shouldn't panic. A few minutes later, John went alone to the Masherman's house, the person Miles had killed. Once inside, John wrote everything he had planned, in anticipation if his illness recurred and suddenly forgot his memory. Then, John tricked the incident at the crime scene. Then he also killed the security guard who was guarding the CCTV room. John quickly manipulated the CCTV footage to make it look as if Miles had never been there. After feeling everything was safe, John hurried away from that man's house. The next day, showing the police detective Emily who just got a report related to the case of a man's death last night. Quickly, the detective and his men immediately went to process the crime scene at that man's house. Once there, the detective examines the man's body and looks for other evidence of the murder. On the other hand, it shows John who went to one of his colleagues named Xavier Crane. We are told that Xavier used to be a former hitman, just like John. But now he is retired because he is no longer young. Here John tells Xavier about his illness. And John also explained that Miles, his son, had been involved in a murder case. John has a plan to save Miles, and all the plans he has wrote on a piece of paper. John asked Xavier for help to contact John every day, then remind him of John's plan to save Miles, his son. John was worried that if he suddenly lost his memory, he wouldn't remember the notes on his paper. Hearing this, Xavier promised to remind John every day through phone calls. In the afternoon, John was seen soiling Miles' white shirt with fake blood, which he then put in a plastic bag. Not long after, John's girlfriend arrives, because they haven't seen each other in a few days. However, John is busy organizing a plan to save Miles, so he doesn't really respond to his girlfriend. Here, Annie, the girlfriend, accidentally finds an expensive painting and asks if this painting is real. John replied that the painting was indeed original, and the price could reach $1 million. Soon John will sell the painting, then he will distribute the money equally to people John loves. Then John asked that the girlfriend should just go home and come back tomorrow, because now he was very busy. A few hours after that, John was contacted by Xavier, his best friend. Here Xavier asks if John still remembers the plan. John replied that until now he still remembered, even he was busy organizing everything. Then Xavier advised John not to lock his cell phone with a passcode, because if his illness come back and his cell phone was locked, then everything would be troublesome. Then John agreed. After that, John kept a fake fingerprint on the knife used by Miles when finishing off those men. John had also manipulated other evidence, which he put into a plastic bag. Later that evening, John met with Miles at a cafe. Here John said that sooner or later Miles would be interrogated by the police, because the man that he killed had a relationship with Miles' daughter or John's granddaughter. John suggested that when interrogated later, Miles should keep calm and not panic, because it will only make the police suspicious. After understanding what John said, they returned to their each homes. On the next day, John was seen watching Miles' house from a distance, until when Miles and his family had left the house, John immediately went inside secretly. It has not been told what John really wants, but certainly John will remove all the evidence that has been manipulated. Then he kept it separately in Miles' room. On the other hand, it shows Miles and his family having lunch at a restaurant. At the same time, a man is seen paying attention to Miles' daughter. Miles, who didn't accept that his daughter always been watched, he immediately beat the man. Behind that, John, who was already at home, was suddenly visited by several policemen. It turns out that the police were ordered by Detective Emily to bring John to the office for the death of Muncie, John's friend and John's target, at the beginning of the story. Casually, John agreed to go with them. Upon arrival at the police station, the detective explained that in the CCTV footage, he found John in the yard of the target's house. until the detective suspects that John is the third person in the case of the death of two men who shot each other. John casually replied that maybe at that time he just happened to be passing by. John also asked whether the detective had stronger evidence for his accusations. As a result, the detective could not answer, and John was released again. After that, John went to his ex-wife's house, or Miles' mother. Here, John apologizes if in the past he often hurt her. John also promised that soon he would cash in all his assets and then distribute the property to his ex-wife and also Miles, their son. Hearing all that, the wife replied that she had forgiven John long ago, and the wife also hoped that they could back together again. However, John, who realized that his life wouldn't be long, refused and chose to leave there. In the afternoon, when John was at home, he was again visited by his girlfriend. Here, John also said that soon he would liquidate all assets and then distribute them to 3 people. The 3 people are Miles, his son, John's ex-wife, and also the girlfriend. Hearing this, the girlfriend just thought John was joking and didn't take John's words seriously just now. Then the girlfriend invites John to the room to make love. The scene moves to Detective Emily and her men. Here, they just got information that the man whose case was being investigated had a relationship with Miles' daughter. That very day, the detective ordered her men to bring Miles and his family in for interrogating. 1 hour later, Miles and his family were seen arriving at the police station. Miles would be interrogated by Detective Emily, while Kaylee, his daughter, and Cheryl, Miles' wife, would be interrogated by her partner. While interrogating, the detective had also mobilized her men to search Miles' house. Here, the detective said that in the CCTV footage, she saw Miles coming to the man's house. Plus, Miles' daughter also had a close relationship with those men. And that's what made the detective have to interrogate Miles. In accordance with the direction of John, his father, Miles tried to keep calm by saying that he wasn't the culprit. Miles will also wait for his lawyer to arrive, and Miles will not answer any questions before the lawyer arrives. At the same time, the detective got a report from her men that in Miles' room they had found a knife, Miles' white shirt that was still covered in blood, and in Miles' suit there was a strand of hair. Hearing this, the detective had to detain Miles first, because now the evidence of those men's murder was getting stronger, leading to Miles. They only need to check the fingerprints on the knife and match the blood on Miles' shirt. Previously known, who kept all the items was John, but still don't know why John did that. On the other hand, it shows John who is in one of the parks. At this time, John's illness was getting worse, so he had to faint suddenly. A few minutes later, John was seen on his way home being carried by Xavier, his best friend. Apparently, John was saved by Xavier, who accidentally passed by the park. Here, John began to be dazed, then asked what had happened to him. Xavier explains everything, and he also reminds John of his plan to help Miles. In the end, John is able to remember everything again. Arriving home, John asked Xavier to wait in the car while he would go into the house to take the diamonds and his expensive painting. But when he went inside, John was suddenly shot at by several robbers. Apparently, the robbers were his girlfriend who wanted all of John's possessions. However, casually, John could turn things around. It didn't take long. John managed to finish off the robbers. Then he held the girlfriend at gunpoint, then said why the girlfriend had to do all this, even though the girlfriend will also get the inheritance from John. The girlfriend replied that she thought that John would never give her an inheritance. After that, John decided to immediately sell his diamonds and paintings with Xavier, while John's girlfriend just left. A few hours later, seen John selling his paintings and diamonds. Then he asks Xavier to deliver all the money to the mentor, Philo Jones. It is known that the one who will divide all the inheritance will be the mentor, while John himself will go to Miles, who is currently being held temporarily at the police station. Here, Xavier tells the mentor that John has changed the list of rights that will receive his inheritance from 3 people to 2 people. It turned out that John had crossed out his girlfriend from the list of beneficiaries because she had dared to betray him. Now the ones who will get the inheritance are John's ex-wife and Miles, his son. At the same time, John was seen talking with Miles. Here John says that the one who has kept all the evidence is him, thus making Mills have to be arrested. Hearing this, it was clear that Miles was very disappointed with John for to do this. But John only replied that Miles would find out later. After that, John immediately left Miles. The scene moves to the police detective and his men who have just finished examining the fingerprints and blood on Miles' shirt. Here, the investigators do not find Miles' fingerprints on the knife they have found, but rather they point to John. The blood on Miles' shirt was also not his, but animal blood, while a strand of hair stuck to Miles' suit was also not those man's hair. From here, Detective Emily could conclude that Miles was just being framed, and the real culprit is John. They quickly went to John's house. Upon arrival, the detective immediately arrested John and then said why he had the heart to trap Miles, his own son. John argued that he really hated Miles because Miles never considered him as a father, even though it is known that this is all John's plan from the start, so that Miles can be free. John did all this, of course, for Miles, because he actually loved his son very much. Plus, John also realized that his life wouldn't be long anymore, and he is sincere if he has to die in prison later. In the end, John was arrested and sentenced to 10 years in prison, while Miles himself was released because he was proven innocent and not guilty. 1 week later, see Miles visiting his father in prison. Here he can only cry because Miles just realized that John manipulated the evidence just to be able to save himself. Then John asked Miles to keep his spirit alive and never commit a crime again, like his father. 1 month later, John has now died in prison, and automatically all of his inheritance is immediately distributed to his ex-wife and also his son Miles. They were happy mixed with sadness because they remembered John was gone, but the inheritance is so very huge. At the same time, the movie ended.